Crowther. And she's going to be, she is with the Kansas Small Business Assistance Program. And she's going to be talking a little bit about the annual report data that hopefully you all send in and how it's used, and then get some feedback from you guys on how we could continue to use it. So take it away, Allison.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So as Lisa said, I'm with the Kansas SBEAP and National SBEAP. I've been with the Kansas SBEAP for a couple years now, and so I worked on the annual report this year and last year, kind of the main one, working on the data, getting some of those statistics, and pulling out some of those quotes and case studies. So a little bit of background first, if it will advance, there we go. So originally the ASBO was actually collecting data from the SBEAPs and preparing reports for Congress on SBEAP activity. The last time they prepared one of those reports was actually for the 2011 to 2012 data, at which time they also prepared a 20-year summary. And then for 2013 and 2014, that data kind of went unused. We had a little bit of a lapse there. And then starting with the 2015 data, the SBEAPs organized to publish the annual report we know today. So they created their own data collection tool, started having a training, which we have every year to ensure consistent data, and created the one-page template that we use now. So goals for this year's report, one kind of running goal we have is just to get that key data and the best information we can without putting too much of a burden on SBEAPs. We know that this data, it can take a little bit to get it together, and it can be a little bit of an endeavor to submit it. So we want to make that as easy as possible while still getting good information from SBEAPs on their activities. One development this year, we actually built a dedicated page on our website for the annual report. So that's where you will find the most recent annual report, as well as previous reports, including the last ASBO report. That's also where you'll go to submit your report for your program when we're collecting that, and where you will find resources on how to gather your data and how to prepare it to submit, including the questions that we ask as a reference and a recording of a previous training, again, to use as a reference. So a little bit of the process this year. Indiana hosted the data collection tool again, and again, we in Kansas kind of took the lead on creating that one-page flyer and prepared that report, which the National Steering Committee and individual states use as a tool to communicate with regional small business liaisons, as well as regional administrators. The ASBO uses that to promote the national SBEAP to EPA, and it also helps states to promote their individual programs. And can we go to our first poll? So basically, do you use the annual report to promote your program? And we'll let that run for just a little bit. Okay, I think we're leveling off, so let's go ahead and end. All right. So we've got close to half of programs that are using it. Okay, and to kind of dive into what we collect, so a quick overview of the data that we collect as part of the annual report, and the questions that we ask SBEAPs when they submit. So first off, just the basis that they're collecting data on, usually state fiscal year or calendar year. Either one is fine, neither is better than the other. It's mostly a measure of consistency to make sure, if someone submitted on calendar year last year, they're still submitting on calendar year. And then, of course, what state you're representing, a little bit of contact information, especially if we need to double check something about your data. The budget for your SBEAP, either calendar year or fiscal year, again, just so we can see that consistency, or if you're unable to isolate, which we have several programs that they're part of, most of them are part of an environmental agency or something like that. So it can be difficult to isolate just the SBEAP budget from that agency's budget or from their department's budget. We also ask for total FTEs, so full-time equivalent, dedicated to SBO and SBEAP work. Whether you have a compliance advisory panel or equivalent, and whether or not they're active, where your program is housed, what media are covered. So pretty much everyone who responds covers air, but we also want to know what other media you might cover. So contacts, so outreach activity and assistance, and then web traffic, if you have a website, how many hits do you get, basically? Do you use social media? If so, what types of social media do you use? Narrative, so that's where we're looking for those quotes and those case studies. And then evaluation, so environmental and compliance data, as well as customer satisfaction. So for a little bit of context, we're going to look at the response rates for just a second. So we had 38 programs responding this year, representing 36 states. That tends to fluctuate some from year to year. I just like to show this trend just as context when we're looking at the other data and trying to think about how that's changed in the last year or two. So diving into some of that information, how many employees support the SBO, SBEAP, or CAP only. You can see most responding programs, it was less than 2 full-time equivalent, or 2 to 4. Where is the program housed? The vast majority are in environmental agencies. And then do you have a CAP or an equivalent advisory group, and also is that active? So we actually had right at 50% have a CAP or equivalent of programs that responded this year, and about 68% of those CAPs were listed as active. And then as far as technical assistance areas, 81% of respondents were multimedia, so they cover at least 2 different media. As you can see, wastewater, pollution prevention, these tend to be some of the biggest ones. And then other also included things like we had a couple programs that mentioned underground storage tanks, as well as brownfields and some grant programs. And getting into 2019 activities, so first off, I want to explain a couple distinctions between these 2 top graphs. So the one on the left is your activities versus the one on the right is the audience for those activities. So for example, when we're looking at webinars and workshops, the one on the left will be how many webinars or workshops you held. The one on the right will be your total attendance for all the webinars and workshops that you held. One other thing I want to draw your attention to is this one on the left is the only logarithmic graph in this presentation, because mailings and publications were so much bigger of a category than the others. That was the only way everything would show up on the graph. And then we also have estimates and counts for each type of assistance activities. And I know this looks like one way outstrips the others, and that might seem strange, but really other assistance versus site visits and permit assistance. Other assistance really is kind of a catch-all. It covers a lot. So this is actually a pretty good job of breaking out that site visit and permit assistance versus other assistance, rather than just kind of lumping everything together. So looking at some of our online statistics, one of the questions is just, do you have a website? One of the main things we're looking at really is, do you have a dedicated page for SBEAP space? Because we still have some programs that don't, and that's something that National SBEAP really helps to fill in that role, or fill in that space, because even if they don't have a lot of dedicated space, they can still link to us. So this year we had 87% of respondents did have a website, which is a bit of an upward trend. We saw, I think, 82% last year, and before that, I think we were in the 70s. So it's a good upward trend. As far as social media, so we saw more using Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram, and actually a little bit lower use of Twitter. and we saw 58% overall using social media. And then here, we also, those that have a website, we ask them how many hits they got on their website. So about 39% of those that said they had websites, they didn't have a page view count for their website. And part of that, again, is going to be an issue with trying to separate out the analytics for SBEAP specific resources versus the environmental agency's resources and the environmental agency's website. We have more of the responding programs in these lower brackets of less than 1,000 or 1,000 to 5,000 than we had last year. But again, we also have a higher percentage of those programs saying that they have their website. So kind of what I'm thinking here is we have some newer programs that don't have as many hits yet. At least that's what I like to think. All right, and then getting into some of the narrative things. So again, those quotes and case studies, and then environmental and compliance data tends to kind of roll into that. So we had 14 out of the 38 programs responding this year that provided a narrative or quote, and 4 submitted environmental data. And then for another 3 programs, they didn't necessarily have an answer for the environmental data question, but we found environmental data either in a case study or in other comments that we could still use. And this is, as far as quotes and case studies and environmental data, this is the best turnout we've had since the SBEAP started collecting this information. So that's really promising, and that's really exciting. We also saw a lot of just variety in our case studies. We had the one that we listed on the flyer that's air-related small business assistance, including a pollution prevention element. We had another one that it was a family butcher shop that was looking to expand operations, and there's really detailed technical assistance on their waste and water requirements. And then another mention of a grant program that was helping small business invest in upgrades like replacing gas-powered equipment with electric or converting to LED lighting. We also saw a lot of examples of collaborating with industry and regulators. Tony just talked about some of his work with 6-H, and there was a fair bit of that. Tennessee mentioned something about partnering with the Department of Ag to provide resources for some specific agribusiness sectors. Louisville brought up a multi-pollutant stakeholder group that's working on recommendations for voluntary actions in multiple industry sectors to reduce ozone in the area. Ohio had I believe their second sustainability conference. They mentioned their materials marketplace. Wisconsin put together a printer portal with resources for that industry. And then we also have the research in Colorado on VOC emissions in the cannabis industry. So we saw so much variety and so much depth and breadth of the work that SBEAPs do. So we can only fit so much in the flyer. And we had a lot more than we realistically could. So we are talking to you about other ways to feature some of that information, probably some case studies on our website, but we just really want to be able to promote all that activity because it's a lot of important work, and it's just really cool to be able to show all the different things that SBEAPs are involved in and all the work that they're doing. So again, we did see that increase in environmental data, which is really exciting. We're going to try and get more of that. We're hoping to get up to 20 or 30 programs that submit their environmental data. We're also probably going to be looking at how can we get a little bit more consistency and probably communicating a little bit more clearly what kind of data we're looking for so we can get a little bit more consistency. We had some that were talking about reductions for specific facilities, some that were talking about compliance rates, some that were talking about attainment rates, and it's all good information. We would like to be able to aggregate some data, and that's where we're going to need to see a little bit more consistency. I do want to say that with the caveat of we would rather have your data and have a hard time aggregating it. We really want that data, and we really want that environmental and compliance information. And then, of course, there's always some challenges in collecting that data that I've kind of alluded to as we've gone through, mostly in separating some of the SBEAP data from their environmental agencies' data, whether we're talking about budgets, sometimes FTEs, social media feeds. This also came up with customer satisfaction surveys. Again, that's something we ask about because that is sometimes combined with their overall agency, or environmental data can also be hard to separate out from existing data, what actually goes with the SBEAP. And we're going to have a couple more poll questions here, if we could get those started. Thank you. All right, so we'd like to know, how difficult is it for your program to assemble your data? No judging or anything here. It's just something that we like to evaluate. And then also, when you submit your data, do you keep track of your data? So do you keep that from year to year? And we'll just let that run for a little bit longer. Okay, I think we've pretty well settled out on that. Okay, so we have a lot saying somewhat difficult or neutral, so that's good information. And that you do keep that data from year to year. Okay. So getting to the report itself, just a couple things I want to highlight. Again, we did have a little bit different information this year, just in that we had more of a variety of information, which we had to change up the template just a little bit to accommodate that. So we dedicated less space to client quotes. Partly how we decided to make sure we could incorporate some of that environmental data was we did that results snapshot. So we just kind of featured one program since we couldn't really aggregate. And then we also had a quote from Clint Woods, former Deputy Assistant Administrator for Air and Radiation in EPA, that we really wanted to feature. And then one other thing I wanted to bring up, we do have a template posted on that annual report page that states can use to prepare their own annual report for their program. You certainly don't have to, but it's something to make it easier if that's something you're interested in doing. So this is just kind of highlighting some of the changes to adapt it to an individual state. Things like changing the logo where we have the map of the USA. And one thing that Wisconsin did, since they didn't have the collection of quotes like we do, they instead they put some information on their compliance advisory panel. All right, I'm just going to run through a few kind of fun facts. So staffing ranges everywhere from 0.1 FTE to 83 in California. Most programs do site visits, anywhere from 1 in a year to over 3,000. The average budget from SBEAPs, or from programs that had both their FTE and their budget, which was not all of them because some of the issues with teasing that out. But the average budget for those was 109,000 per FTE. And then just some data on some of the bigger programs participating. And again, we have 19 programs reporting CAP or equivalent. As a side note, if you want to see if your CAP is listed, we do have a map of that on the website, and we would love for you to check and see if your CAP is listed, and if not, let us know, and we can update that. All right, any questions or comments?
Any questions coming in, Nancy?
You bet. Great job, Allison. Really great job. So Allison has this hard job of putting all of this information together and making it look good. And she has done a great job with this. So thank you, Allison, for presenting all of that information and doing those charts. Um, and so we do have one question, and Allison, can you just give, and I can help you if you would like, since you've only been involved for a few years, but a little bit of the history on, how this group came together. It's through the environmental subcommittee and the group that puts all this together, because we don't necessarily do this under the grant. We are the ones who take the information and analyze it, publish it, make it look good. So, but it is a team effort. I don't know if you want to speak to that or if you'd like me to.
I'm good with you covering that, honestly.
Okay, I sure will. So Belinda Breidenbeck is our chair for our environmental subcommittee. I've been the chair before. Linnell Ladd has been the chair before that. And probably in 2015, about the time when I was the chair, we were able to put together a work group, a kind of a smaller subcommittee of our subcommittee, if you will. And we were Indiana. Jennifer Collins stepped up and said, hey, we have access to a paid version of SurveyMonkey, and we would be happy to utilize that, do all the information collecting through Indiana, and then various people, which include right now, Dan from Ohio, Belinda from Idaho, myself, Allison, and then Jennifer. So we've kind of got two in the Midwest, one in the East and one in the West. And we have come together to put the form that you see today, the questions together. We refine them each year, then do the training and update it as needed. Everybody kind of has a part and works on it. And then Jennifer collects all the information, and then our group sorts through it and publishes it and kind of analyzes it and then presents it like this. And then we, like Allison said, we have a dedicated web page now for the annual reports, and we've got them all listed there. That is through your SBEAP SBO resource page. And so I think that answers the question, because as you know, under our grant that we have with EPA, we do not collect data. We do not collect any, we don't do surveys. Our big opportunity to get input from our stakeholders, which is all of you, will happen tomorrow when Donovan does a presentation on the website, and we'll include a lot of polls on that. And that is one of our big opportunities to get input. So I wanted to make sure that I made that really clear. And then, if I said the environmental committee, Tony says, no, Nancy, it's the education subcommittee. So that is true. It is. If I said environmental, it is the education subcommittee. Thank you. Okay, it says, have you considered having a longer narrative report? The annual report flyer is great, but it seems really, it really seems more like a summary marketing piece rather than a comprehensive report. And we might even have some other people in the Q&A kind of put some comments in that I'll share with regard to it being a marketing piece. And Allison, I'll take that one too, just because you've been more on the end of putting all the information together. And what we wanted from this was a marketing piece. We wanted a one-page, two-sided marketing piece that actually, if we gave it to people, they'd read. So we had, you'll remember, some of you, like me, been doing this for 20 years. You will remember the multi-page report that had each individual state's report on it. It was great. I loved it, but I like that kind of thing, and that's the program I work in. But evidently Congress did not. So that was one of the reasons they just eliminated. Plus, can you imagine how expensive that was to put together? So us not having any or much of a budget for this, we decided to go with the one-page marketing piece that maybe regional administrators would actually read, and it would look good, and they'd just see the highlights. So that kind of answers that. If anyone else wants to jump in on that, I don't see it right now. So yeah, we could consider a longer narrative, and we would love to have other people be part of this kind of brainstorming how we might change it going forward. But right now it's going to be a marketing piece. So let's see, there was a thank you comment to Catherine on here, but that had to do with the other session. And then Jasmine writes, is the report still being sent to Congress? So I'm going to ask Paula to weigh in on this. And how is it being used to let them know how important our SBEAPs are to assisting small business? So Paula, if you wouldn't mind chatting in on that through Q&A, that would be great. It is my understanding, Jasmine, that no, it has not. So I believe it was 2012, was it, Allison? Is what we have back on the slide. You might go back if you want to, but 2012, back to that history slide, I believe was about the last time. And Renee was involved also in the original committee that put this together, but then she got busy with the awards subcommittee. But Renee says, yes, the report was originally part of the promotion committee and then switched to education. And so that's probably where we were thinking marketing. And so you can see this is the history. And Paul, if there was something else there, let me see. Paula says that with regard to the report to Congress, this effort annual report is separate from the ASBO's reporting requirement. So her requirement is separate. And evidently our flyer maybe is not necessarily used as part of their reporting requirement. Maybe we can get her to elaborate on that another time. We have about 2 minutes left. Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, great. Lisa, back to you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Allison and Nancy. That was great information about the annual report. Very important piece for us to promote ourselves and show all the great work that we're all doing. So that was great. So that concludes the formal part of our training today.